All right, today we're going deep on a number that can cut right through the noise on a balance sheet. It's called net debt. And honestly, it's one of the most powerful tools you can have for figuring out if a company is as healthy as it looks or if there's trouble hiding just beneath the surface. So let's get right into it.
So, picture this. You're scrolling through the news and you see a headline that says, some company has $1 billion in debt. What's your gut reaction? That they're in huge trouble, right? Maybe on the brink of going under? Well, that's what most people think, but believe me, that single number by itself can be so misleading.
And here is exactly why. Let's look at two companies, Company A and Company B. Now, on paper, they both have that same scary number, $1 billion in debt. But when you look a little closer, you see Company A is sitting on $1.2 billion in cash, while Company B has, well, just $10 million. All of a sudden, that $1 billion of debt means something completely different for each of them, doesn't it? This is the big problem with only looking at total or gross debt.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start by pulling back the curtain on that illusion of gross debt. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually calculate a company's true leverage. After that, we'll talk about what the numbers are signaling, how this plays a massive role in billion-dollar M&A deals, and finally, we'll cover the hidden dangers that even net debt can't show you.
Okay, first up, let's really dig into that headline number and see why it only tells you half of a very important story.
So what is net debt really? I want you to think of it like a financial fire drill. Imagine a company gets a call and they have to pay back every single lender, like right now. The question is, if they used all the cash they could get their hands on immediately, how much would they still owe? That final number, that's the net debt. It's a fantastic what-if test of a company's real financial position.
Okay, so knowing the concept is great, but to really use this, you have to know how the sausage is made. We've got to look inside the formula, because as you're about to see, the details are everything.
And the good news is the core formula is actually super simple. You just take all the debt the company is actually paying interest on. We're talking both short-term and long-term debt. And from that, you subtract its cash and anything else that can be turned into cash really quickly. What's left is a much sharper picture of the company's real debt burden.
But here's the crucial part. You gotta know what to count. We're only including debt that has an interest charge attached to it. Things like bank loans or bonds. We completely exclude stuff like accounts payable. That's just money owed to suppliers for inventory. It's part of the normal rhythm of business, not a financing decision, so it stays out of this calculation.
And on the flip side of that equation, what do we actually mean by cash? Well, it's not just the money in the bank. It's also super liquid things like money market funds or treasury bills that can be sold in a flash. Now, some analysts might also throw in marketable securities, like stocks, but you have to be careful there because their value can jump all over the place.
Okay, so we know how to calculate it. We've got our number. Now what? What is it actually telling us about the company? This is where we learn to read the signals.
So you're basically going to land in one of two camps. The first is positive net debt. This just means the company owes more than it has in cash. And honestly, this is super common, especially for companies that are growing and investing. But if you see that number creeping up year after year, that could be a red flag. On the other hand, you could have negative net debt. We call that a net cash position. This is great. It means they have a huge safety cushion. But if that cash pile gets too big, you have to ask, does management have any good ideas on where to invest it for growth?
But how do you compare a huge company with a small one? $1 billion of net debt is a rounding error for Apple, but a death sentence for a startup. That's where ratios come in. And the king of them all is net debt to EBITDA. Think of it as the time to repay metric. It asks a simple question. If the company used every penny of cash from its operations, how many years would it take to pay off its net debt?
And this isn't just some academic theory. These benchmarks are what lenders and credit rating agencies use every single day. As a rule of thumb, anything under 3x is usually seen as pretty healthy. But once you start getting up past 4x or 5x, yeah, that's when the alarm bells start ringing. It signals that the company might be taking on way too much risk.
But, and this is a big but, context is everything. You absolutely cannot look at this ratio in a vacuum. A ratio of over 5x might be totally normal for an airline, which has massive, capital-intensive assets, but also really predictable cash flows. But that same ratio would be terrifying for a software company in a fast-changing market. You always have to compare companies to their peers.
All right, now for the really high-stakes stuff. Let's talk about how net debt becomes a central player in mergers and acquisitions. This is where the concept gets very real, very fast, with billions of dollars hanging in the balance.
So most big corporate takeovers are structured on what's called a cash-free, debt-free basis. And the logic is really simple. The buyer is buying the business itself, the factories, the brand, the customers. They are not interested in buying the seller's pile of cash, nor do they want to inherit the seller's loans. The seller keeps their cash and is responsible for paying off their own debt.
So here's how it plays out. The two sides first agree on a big headline price for the business. That's the enterprise value. But that is not the amount of money that actually changes hands. From that big number, they subtract the company's net debt right at the moment the deal closes. The result is the actual check the seller gets. So you can see, the higher the net debt, the less cash the seller walks away with.
And this is where the fights happen. The definition of debt becomes an absolute battleground. The buyer's lawyers and accountants will argue that things like a big pension shortfall or unpaid executive bonuses are debt-like items. They'll say, hey, we're going to have to pay this cash out eventually, so it's basically debt. And every single dollar they can successfully get classified as debt is another dollar they don't have to pay for the company.
Now, net debt is clearly a fantastic tool, but like any metric, it's not perfect. It has blind spots. A truly sharp analyst knows that the number on the page is just the starting point of the real investigation. Let's look at what it can miss.
The key is to always ask, what am I not seeing? Some companies might have debt hidden away in off-balance sheet entities, or that big cash number, maybe a huge chunk of it is trapped overseas and would trigger a massive tax bill to bring home. Or maybe it's restricted in an escrow account and can't be touched. These are all real liabilities that the standard formula won't catch.
A perfect real-world example of this was how companies used to account for leases. Before 2019, if a retailer leased all its stores, that massive long-term liability often didn't even show up on the balance sheet. It made them look way less indebted than they actually were. New accounting rules came in and forced those leases onto the books, and poof, the reported net debt for many companies shot up overnight.
Here's another sneaky one. A company could have $1 billion in debt that costs them 7% in interest, and at the same time have $1 billion in cash that's only earning them 1%. Their net debt would be zero, right? $1 billion minus $1 billion. But they are bleeding $60 million a year in negative cash flow. We call this negative carry, and it proves that even zero net debt doesn't mean there's zero financial impact.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Net debt is absolutely essential. It's a huge step up from just looking at gross debt and gives you a much more honest view of a company's health. But it's just that. It's the starting point, not the final answer. The real skill is learning to look past the formula and understand the true economic story behind the numbers.
So there you have it. You now have the framework that the pros use to figure out how much leverage a company is really carrying. So the next time you open up a financial report, you won't just see the headline number. You'll know to ask the deeper questions. The only question left is, what hidden risks are you going to look for?